Thanks to the Cherryfield Arts Initiative for asking me to make this video. They're an organization in Cherryfield, Maine, providing arts educational opportunities to people who otherwise don't have access. For more information, find them on Facebook. You can also find more information by visiting my website, www.timchristensenporcelain.com. Hi everybody, my name is Tim Christensen and I'm coming to you from my studio in Roque Bluffs. I'm a potter who primarily works in Sgraffito, and I've been working in this discipline since 2004, and I've been a potter since 1999. Previous to being a Sgraffito artist, I was a production potter in southern New Hampshire and southern Maine. Then I moved up here and built this off-grid studio, and I'm here sometimes, I'm here not. Right now, I'm here all the time. So what we're going to do today is we're going to decorate this cup using Sgraffito. Sgraffito is the art of scratching through one layer of clay or glaze or sheen to get to a different color, sheen, texture of clay underneath. It's considered at this point to be the oldest written record of our historical progress as a species, and it's thought right now that it jumped up about 6,000 years BCE, so about 8,000 years ago, and it came along at a time of great social change, and humans being the innovative group that we are, for better or for worse. In times of great social change, we need a way to both preserve our historical perspective and the things that we've learned as individuals, and we also need a way to speak across cultures and across language barriers and geographic barriers and even time barriers. And so it's thought right now that Sgraffito came about as a way to preserve information in a less centralized manner than oral tradition. It makes a lot of sense, really. If you are in a group of people and it's been that family group for hundreds of generations, it makes sense that information would be stovepiped and held within individuals. And then if all of a sudden you have contact with people from outside of your culture, outside of your geographic area, and you can move there, you can go there, or things they bring into your culture are dangerous to you and people wind up dying, then, if your only record of your history is in your head, the people you leave behind are stuck. Well, Sgraffito jumped up. We had pottery for, as far as we can tell, about 22,000 years. And then people started recording their thoughts on the surfaces of pottery using Sgraffito. And they started doing this in picture form, right? Because pictures and symbols you can understand even if you don't speak the language. It's why emojis work. They literally are our modern version of Sgraffito. Instead of using pottery, they're using the internet, but the internet allows us to do the same things of transcending the difficulties of geography and time and space and language. So these pots that we're going to make are kind of like the first emojis. You can think of them that way. And, unlike emojis, though, we can still understand these even though we don't have any of the technological capabilities that they used to have back then. So even if this cup that we're going to make were to break apart, the information is still chemically bonded onto the surface, and these things can be put together and still understood. That's why we have all these beautiful Anasazi pots that have all this information on them. They were broken into thousands of pieces out in the desert, and then intrepid, whatever you'd like to call them, put them back together again. And we have access to that information again. These are the same thing. They're made of porcelain. Porcelain, as far as we know, is inert over the course of forever. It's basically quartz or glass or sand. So we're taking this clay and we're transforming it into a man-made, essentially, quartz feldspar. And this will last as long as these things don't get ground up under a glacier or melted in a volcano, as far as we can tell. So, a couple different things. First of all, by all means, you can use your own pottery cup. It doesn't have to be porcelain, and it doesn't have to be slip. Mine is a cone 10 porcelain, which can be fired anywhere between cone 6 and cone 10 in an electric, gas, or wood-fired kiln. And then the slip is also compatible with that on top. You don't have to do that. You can use a low-fire clay and an underglaze. You can use a high-fire clay and an underglaze. These things all work great. You can use a low-fire clay and a high-fire clay over the top. Doesn't really matter. Or you can go to my website, which is listed at the bottom in the description of this video, timchristensenporcelain.com, and you can order a Sgraffito at home kit and get everything you need. You get a slipped cup, you get a tool, you get a thank you note, and you get a reusable box to ship the cup back to me, where I'll fire it and then send it on back to you. That's my little plug. But you don't have to do that. If you have access to your own pottery equipment or know someone who does, you can do this at home. The great thing about this is that it's an insanely simple technology. People have been doing it for 8,000 years, and literally all you need is mud, a stick, and a nail. You probably don't even need the nail or the stick. You need one of them, but probably not both. Anyway, let's get started. All right, so here's our cup, and it's all covered with slip. These are the tools that I'm basically going to use. You can use any or all or none of these. If you bought the kit, then you're going to have a Sgraffito tool that's going to be basically like this. It's going to have a wooden handle and a little point on it. I also use a knife with a non-serrated end, and either a pencil or a Sharpie, just for lining out things if I want to remember things or I want to block out areas but don't want to leave a white line. Sharpie and pencil will burn off in the kiln, so you can mark the heck out of the surface with these and then actually make your permanent line with this stylus. So I'm going to put all these away so I don't have a cluttered workspace here. I suggest that you work on a pad of some sort. A paper towel that's folded into quarters works great, and it's a good reminder to keep the cup on the table. So that's rule number one, is that I try not to lift up the cup too much. If you drop this cup, it is absolutely going to break. These are especially porcelain. I mean, earthenware and stoneware are a little bit tougher, but not much. Porcelain is basically like working with a Ritz cracker. That's kind of how I think about it. So the first thing that I've done here is I've lined out the top and the bottom. In traditional pottery, your components of a form have different purposes, and they have different kind of iconographic meanings, or different roles, I guess you could say. So design-wise, the foot is distinct from the rim, is distinct from the gallery, right? And then in the gallery, we often have other components like the hip, shoulder, or like a waist if it goes in a little bit. Anyway, this is the gallery, this is the foot, and this is the rim. When you come upon a cup, the thing that you're going to see most is the rim, right? If you look down, you see this on a table, much like this view here. You're going to see all of the rim. You see all of the rim, but you see very little of the gallery. You can pick it up, of course, and then inspect it. This is like your first impression. This is like when you meet somebody new for the first time, and that first, like, half a second where you're like, oh, or like, oh, that's this, right? So your job is to make this like, oh, if you want to be that way. If you want to be like, well, then make it that way too. This is where you do that. I also treat that my background is as a writer, and I look at this as being like the introduction or the conclusion, right, of a writing piece. And so oftentimes I'll go back and I'll treat the rim after I've done all the work on the gallery. It can also be thought of as a picture frame. So you have a frame here and a frame here, and that binds the design into here and also acts as a little bit of a control over the environment in which your design is going to be seen, much like a picture frame. So this will isolate your design from whatever's going on around this cup, just like a picture frame or like a belt, right? You wear a belt to break the pattern of your shirt and your pants. At least I do. Mostly because I have to. That's a totally different thing. And actually, we'll come back to that. Think about line when you're drawing and the universal visual language that we're working in here. That's what art really is. It's a language which transcends all of the things that we've been talking about. So it's a universal visual language. We have certain parts of that, foundations of that, which appear to be universal, and that is the idea of line as signifying difference. Something on this side of this line is going to be different than something on this side of this line. Otherwise, there'd be no line there. It's almost elemental. It's almost to the point of complexity because it's so elemental. It's like trying to define the word "the" to me. So this is your signifier. Something here is going to be different than here. If you want to accentuate the difference, make a thicker line. If you want to minimize the difference, make a thinner line. Okay. So the way that I got this nice, neat line here is I made a tool with my finger. I kind of overlap the stylus with my finger. And I gauge it. It's like a gauge in woodworking, for those of you who come from that. And then I turn the cup. I do a lot of turning of the cup. And this cup is still basically in contact with the surface. I'm not scraping it along, but I'm also not really picking it up much. And then I keep going. I did the same thing on the foot. These isolate these two components. The foot, the purpose of the foot is to elevate your form off of the table. So traditionally, the elevation, the amount of elevation that a form is off the table denotes the amount of ritualistic importance it has. We see examples of this all the time, like a stem on a wine glass, an ornate chalice with a stem and a foot on candelabra, really formal soup tureens. All of these things have elements to lift the form off of the surface upon which it's placed in an effort to make it look like it's floating there, in an effort to make it look like it is something from outside of this world in a way, and not necessarily, and to reference the idea that its import is not as a functional thing from the earth, but more as a symbolic or a spiritual body. So we try and levitate at that to show that it's not, that the laws that bind all of us aren't necessarily applicable to that form, at least visually, right? So we can treat this as separate from this form. The purpose of this part right here is to elevate this. It's to show that this is, because it's not just a cup resting on the table. I can show you this actually. This was my coffee cup from this morning. Simple cup, right? No foot ring. It's just a cup. This one's a little bit more special. It has a foot ring, and it's going to sit off the table and appear to float there unless you get right down next to it. You can accentuate that here. Okay, so now let's decorate the gallery. You can draw in, you can block in. So if I wanted to do that, I don't do that myself very often. If I'm working with a new animal or I'm working with a really complex kind of depth of light, especially looking through water, then I might line some elements out with my pencil. But in general, I don't. In general, I don't draw them. But what I will say is that the drag of the clay on the stylus is going to give you a lot more control than you're used to with the pencil. You may find that as you go along here, I mean, by all means, to give yourself confidence, use pencil lines, but bear in mind that your lines are going to be smoother because they have to cut through that clay. And the pencil just kind of glides across it. So let's see, what am I going to draw here? How about, let's draw a bird. When in doubt, right? There are a bunch of exemplars after this video. You'll see I put together a video of throwing a cup off the wheel and trimming it by hand. I put together some video of making the Sgraffito at home boxes and how to make your own Sgraffito tool. And there are a number of exemplars as well. There are a couple etching videos as well on there. One time lapse of a complete cup being done. Note how I'm using the form to help me to get a nice transition from relatively thick to non-existent on these lines. I'm not like making each one deliberate. I'm making repetitive motion, and oftentimes I'm moving the cup so I can keep my hand in that place. You'll see it especially when I'm working on, let's see, if I were going to do a lined background, let's say. Let's do that. Let's do a lined background. So let's say this element here is going to be lined. I'm drawing an outline, right, to signify that it's something different. And then I'm going to pick a line, that one, and then I'm going to move the cup. That way I can keep my hand still, and I can keep that motion the same, and I can move the cup to get the line to go where I want it to go. It's so much easier than trying to move my hand and get the line consistent, because this form is totally different. Every place I put my hand is a different feeling. It's a different ratio of my pinky, which I'm bracing my where I'm bracing my finger on the form, to the end of the stylus. So it's much easier for me to just move the cup around. Kind of keep this as one tool unit, right? And then move it around like that. I need to put in the other side of that tree, lest I forget. Okay, so we've got this poor, sad little bird here. Let's put a little highlight on the eye. I don't even know what kind of bird that is. Sad. Poor little bird. Okay, so let's complete this little thing here. And then let's talk about how to build depth. So one way that we can do that is we can layer things. So we've got our bird here. We already have an outline on this side. So let's put an outline over here as well, just to make it consistent. I like to leave lots of room for my subconscious to come out in my drawings. I feel like my subconscious mind is a way better artist than my conscious mind. So the less that I can plan, which I think of as a very conscious sort of activity, then the more I can kind of react to the things that are happening on here on a temporal time scale. So, and I think that's a response to just working on a 3D form, right? I can never really know how these things are going to lay out on each of these forms. Every form is different. And just like if you took a globe and you laid it out flat and you had a map, the proportions would all be wrong. If you took these things and you laid them all out, you know, they'd look like birds because they have a beak and an eye and these weird little feet. But besides that, the proportions would be just totally crazy. This looks like an egg shape with like a weird circle in the middle and another weird circle in the middle, if I really look at it. But because it's on that form, it looks like a bird that's looking right at you. Right? So that happens because I just kind of don't think about it. I try not to plan it out, and I try and respond to the way that these lines are on the form. So my subconscious really picked that outermost curve as the place for the outermost part of this bird, if that makes sense. Okay, so we've got an outline around that now, and we want to build some depth with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up to the rim, and I'm going to add a little depth feature. I'm going to add like a little false rim up here, a little accent. And look at how that accent is going to go behind that bird. So now I'm going to make it really stand out. Let's make it like triangles, black and white. So yeah, it looks brown right now, but it's going to be black and white after it gets fired. Okay. So I have a blade on the back of this tool, and I'm going to use this for most of it, but I also want to show you that you can do this with a knife, a regular flat-bladed knife. And what this is going to do is it's going to give you an atextural white. In a second, I'm going to show you how to make textural white. And if you have a ribbon tool, which is what this is, then you can do the same thing. So I've got some depth here. Let's make that outline a little bit bigger, more noticeable. Let's add some highlights into this bird. Let's add some more depth. So let's add another kind of tree back here. Let's go with one with like actual bark on it. One thing that I really like in drawings is I like a high contrast. I like a lot of variation between light and dark, thick and thin, high contrast. Right? That's what this whole thing is. I don't have access to grayscale. So it's both, it could be my strength or it could be my weakness. I like to think of it as a strength. I don't have to worry about grayscale. I don't have to worry about grayscale taking away from my ability to create contrast. And I can use that contrast to make a more interesting drawing than if I had included gray. That's how I think about it. So it's part of my job, part of my own metric for being successful, to have high degrees of contrast in my pieces to make them really dynamically exciting. And that's what I shoot for. Okay, so here we have got a bird that's in front of a rim that's in front of a tree. And now let's add some light back there. I'm going to carry this design the whole way through. Typically, I would not work backwards in depth like this on this part of the cup and then presumably do the same thing over here. Typically, I'd work where it was all the first part of the depth, so I'd go draw a bird here, and then I'd draw some more sticks and maybe some other birds or whatever else this bird was interacting with, and then work backwards, and then work backwards, and then work backwards on the whole cup at once. But because I'm really trying to pack a lot in here, then I'm just going to work here, and then you can extrapolate. So I've got my bird, I've got my background, I've got my rim, I've got my background. I'm going to add in another background. I'd like this bird. This bird looks dark, so I want it to look backlit, as if the light were filtering down through branches. So remember before, a couple minutes ago, I talked about having a textural white or a directional white, and that's what I'm going to do now. So up here, you know, if you take that flat blade, you can just make it really smooth and it'll just be white. But if you draw it with a stylus, then you're going to leave a little bit of black. And that little bit of black you leave is going to give you direction. It's going to give you texture. It's going to make the viewer think that there's something there, but maybe it's out of focus. Sometimes the thing that's there is light. Sometimes the thing that's there is fog or clouds or water. Sometimes it's branches. I don't really spend a lot of time trying to define those things. I really define the things that I am interested in talking about, and I let the rest of them just kind of be like, yeah, there's something there, but you can figure out what it is. I only know what I know. Okay. There we go. Textural white. A lot of times, I'll draw another outline there. So I basically have not much. I have black, I have white, I have directional or textural white. And then another thing that I use is I draw lots of circles right on top of each other. You know, like this. They're fast and they fill in okay. So, if I were doing that here, I'd go. Okay. And the other thing that I do is sometimes I'll take a drill bit and I'll twist it in my fingers. You can use anything for this, I mean, really. But I'll take a drill bit and I'll twist it in my fingers to get a dot like that. So I have circles, I have dots, I have lines, I have black, I have white, I have directional white. Those are my tools. The last thing you need to do after you've finished your cup is sign it. This area, this little well, is considered to be the potter's area. This is where you get to sign it. You get to do whatever you want in there. If you were a traditional potter making work to go out and for other people to use, for other people to ritualize in their own lives, then this is considered your spot. And so this is where I typically sign my piece. A lot of people put little pictures there, or they'll have stamps or whatever. Anyway, that's how it is. And then if you've bought a Sgraffito at Home kit, package it up, ship it back to me, and I'll fire it and get it back to you. Thanks to the Cherryfield Arts Initiative for asking me to make this video. They're an organization in Cherryfield, Maine, providing arts educational opportunities to people who otherwise don't have access. For more information, find them on Facebook. You can also find more information by visiting my website, www.timchristensenporcelain.com. So what we're going to make today is some Sgraffito tools. I went out and I clipped a couple of birch sticks, they're just saplings, and you can see that they're pretty green. That's going to help me when I point them. If you don't use green wood, if you use dry wood, you'll probably have to drill a pilot hole. A little tiny drill bit. Put it through a pencil sharpener. Smooth layers. You bring them down to a point, they also make a really good tool for working on wet clay. So you can use this for scoring, you can use it for smoothing, you can get into hard to reach places the head off of the wire brad. Grab it in the pliers. So that's going to dry over the next day or two, and that wood will tighten up around it now. If you're worried about it, also use a little bit of glue. Bad idea. So I'm using Gorilla Glue, but honestly, it doesn't really work. You could even use it almost. This stuff's super sticky. So, there's a basic Sgraffito tool. If you want to go above and beyond, the Above and Beyond award, you can put a copper ferrule on it. So in this case then, I'm only around one end. And then the other end is going to go into this crimp sleeve. You get those in the electrical department of your hardware store. You have to whittle it down and then the stick so that it fits. I just take the skin off. Expand a little bit when I put that nail in there. So I'm going to make sure I've done enough of this one. This will bring me down to solid wood too.